All right, so in the previous pages, I kind of went over gesture drawing, which is good for capturing motion and movement, but it's not necessarily the best at creating consistency between drawings, as well as just staying on model in general. So typically, what you're going to see is that most 2D characters and 3D characters, really for this matter, will utilize construction models, and construction models are basically foundational shapes that you draw um, in order to keep consistency between drawing from one animator to another animator, from one film to another film, so on and so forth. All right, it's basically the process of designing the character in such a way that there are rules you follow, and use foundational shapes to produce. Okay. So, in pretty much every TV series you've ever seen, all of those, anything that's like a mainline production will utilize construction models. Even in the development of 3D or stop motion characters, when they design the characters initially, they will still utilize the same sort of process. And in fact, actually, you might even incorporate it into the modeling itself. So one of the ways I teach how to model is just using primitives and combining them together and then going in and going from there. So our primary uh forms that you're going to see are basically these three, right? We have spheres. These are the most common ones to use. They are the best because the sphere is really just a circle. You can draw a circle. All you have to do to make it a sphere is draw a center line or an eye line or an ear line, or all three. And if you want to make like a head turn or rotate or whatever, you just have the center line, you draw the nose coming off of it, and then you just draw this line in a different direction and draw the nose coming off of it. So it's really easy to change the perspective of a sphere because you just change the center line's axis, or not axis, but its direction. All right. So spheres are the most common. You'll see like most cartoons you've watched will utilize those. There are also cylinders. Those are pretty obvious. You're going to utilize those in the arms and such like that. They are probably the second easiest because they have sphere-like qualities. However, they are privy to perspective and foreshortening, right? As things go away, they'll get smaller. The most difficult are things that are planes or cubes, um, just because those are uh, 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 very vulnerable to perspective struggles, right? I always wonder when I see like some animations, like hand drawn animations, and they have like robots and things like that. It's got to be really hard to keep. If you look at old like Transformers cartoons, though, you'll see they go off model quite a bit, because I think it would just be really difficult to do that like generally. All right, so those are our basic forms. I'm just going to kind of cover cartoon anatomy, so you get just a general idea of how you might utilize those. All right. So down here, if you're doing a head, so the typical head. Now, granted, you do not have to do it this way. You could totally use different shapes. I mean, if you look at like SpongeBob, the top one I showed you there does not use a sphere. But most, if you're just doing a kind of a typical humanoid, you're going to see typically for the cranium, you're going to use a sphere, and then you'll have the jaw come off of it. This is my preferred method because you can draw the center line for the center of the head, and then you can draw an eye line. You put your eyes in there, right? And that's the halfway mark, which makes it pretty easy. And if you go halfway the other direction, that's actually where the jaw should go. And you can see you can change the proportions depending on what your design is. I don't want you to like super keep tied down to these suggestions because otherwise your designs will be generic. But I do want you to be aware of them and maybe utilize them at times. There's a bunch of other things in here that I don't want to go through all these different things, but there are things called like anchor points. The idea with anchor points is that when I draw this eye line here, I would draw the eyes attached to it, and those are kind of like anchored to that line. That's the idea. So you try to find areas that you can anchor onto the form to so that you don't accidentally have like eyes or noses. Like the nose obviously would be centered on this center line coming down, right? It makes it easier so you don't have like nose and eyes and ears floating around. Um, Also, if you have squash and stretch, this jaw might stretch down, but that would keep the eye from like stretching with the jaw. I don't want the whole skull to stretch. I would want just the jaw. Hopefully that makes sense. But you can read this if you want, and there's probably stuff online as well. Torso, Again, this one can vary quite a bit. Typically, you see a sort of pear shape. I like to just draw basically the costal region here, the rib cage, just kind of this oval, and then do like a cylinder coming off of it, because that's sort of what the form is underneath. You have the, like the rib cage, and then you have basically your abdomen and all the different muscles and stuff therein, as well as basically, the neck is a cylinder. Appendages are generally just going to be cylinders. One thing I highly suggest, unless you're going for a particular style, when you think of arms and legs, think of them as two separate cylinders, not as one that is bent. Because what will end up happening is if you think of it as one that is bent, you'll end up not having a very strong elbow or knee because it'll just look like a bent thing. Unless you're going for a particular like old school style where you want to do like rubber hose style animation, then obviously you can do that. But you're better off often thinking of things as separate forms stuck together. When you do hands and fingers, I always just, and feet for that matter, I generally just think of those as planes. I think that's a little bit easier. If you try to draw these as, if you think of the fingers and toes as cylinders, which I know in some degree they do appear that way, you'll end up with like kind of sausagey looking hands. You're better off thinking of them in planes. It'll also be easier to draw them and to position them in perspective if they think of them more in that sense as opposed to the other. Obviously, with all these, you can vary up the proportions. You can use the same general construction model and just scale things up and down and around, and you can end up with a variety of designs all from the same same general skeleton, just the same as you would see in mammalian anatomy, right? All mammals have rib cages and femurs and humerus and cranium. They all have these elements. They're just stretched and squashed, and they're just positioned differently in order to allow for a wide variation. Um, what I would suggest is if you click on this here, this will bring you to a website where it has a bunch of different model sheets. And you can look at these and they might give you a good idea. So choose one that makes you feel, warm and fuzzy. I would say generally the Western ones will probably have a little bit better model sheets because their stuff typically is a little more cartoony and a little more animated, meaning there's a lot more movement. So the consistency of drawing is more important. So I would say generally like Disney stuff and Warner Brothers stuff will probably have the best sort of construction model examples, especially the old school stuff because they like did a really good job. So you can see here they kind of give you a sense of dimension here. And it's interesting they put this little line here. But anyway, I would just observe these and it'll give you an idea of like what I'm talking about rather than me talking about it forever. Okay, it's weird. He's basically a baby, isn't he? Um, so yeah, look up. You can watch those or look view those, and hopefully you'll get an idea of kind of what I'm talking about with construction models. But when you are drawing, I will start off with sort of a gesture drawing. If I'm doing animation, I'll start off with a sort of gesture drawing, and then I will start building out from that the construction model to fit within it. If that makes sense.